So friends, you will undoubtedly remember that Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis, who indicted Donald Trump for RICO conspiracy charges and also indicted something like 16 alleged co-conspirators, all of whom were indicted for attempting to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia. You will recall that Fani Willis and her entire office were removed from the case for an appearance of conflict, and a new prosecutor was finally named to step in and take over the case. Well, that prosecutor just announced that the state of Georgia would dismiss the RICO case in which Donald Trump and several alleged co-conspirators had been indicted by the grand jury, and the presiding judge, Judge Scott McAfee, just dismissed the case. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, let me not bury the lead. Today is a rough day for the rule of law. Today is a rough day for free and fair American elections. Today is a rough day for justice. After District Attorney Fani Willis and her office were removed from the Georgia State RICO prosecution against Donald Trump and several others who tried to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, you remember some of the most dramatic evidence in the case when Donald Trump said on a recorded call, "Just find me 11,780 votes," and inferentially, just corruptly declare me the winner. That would be an election crime. After Fani Willis was taken off the case for an appearance of conflict, the case was turned over to something called the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia to find a conflict-free prosecutor, and the case landed with the executive director of that organization, a guy named Peter Skandalakis. And Mr. Skandalakis issued a 20 or 22-page memo announcing that, in his opinion, the whole case against Trump and all his indicted co-conspirators should just be dismissed. Let's start with a little bit of the opening salvo in this memo, and then let's turn to the new reporting by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Quote, "Taken as a whole, the indictment in the Trump RICO case alleges a compelling set of acts which, if proven beyond a reasonable doubt, as required by our Constitution, would establish a conspiracy undertaken by multiple individuals working toward a common objective to overturn the results of the November 2020 presidential election in Georgia and in other states across the country." And friends, when this old career prosecutor reads that, I say to myself, great, let's have a trial. A grand jury indicted these charges after an exhaustive investigation of election interference in Georgia. Let's have a trial. But that is not what Mr. Skandalakis had in mind. Here's the new reporting from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Headline, "Georgia dismisses Trump election case, ending Trump's last criminal prosecution." And that article begins, "The Fulton County judge overseeing the 2020 election interference case against President Donald Trump and more than a dozen others agreed to dismiss the probe on Wednesday after a state prosecutor said, the alleged criminal conduct amounted to more of a federal, not state, case. In a brief one-page order, Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee dismissed the sprawling racketeering case first brought by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis more than 2 years ago. Quote, "This case is hereby dismissed in its entirety," the judge wrote. Once seen as among the most promising criminal prosecutions of Trump, the case collapsed amid scrutiny of Willis's romantic and financial ties to the special prosecutor she hired to help lead it. While the development isn't a surprise, it places a capstone on the last criminal prosecution of Trump and one of the most sweeping, divisive cases in Georgia history. Now, nearly 5 years after local prosecutors first launched their investigation of Trump, the case ends with 4 pleas, 4 guilty plea deals from defendants and 0 convictions from a jury. It's highly unlikely that any of the evidence compiled by Willis's team and a special grand jury that heard testimony from everyone from the governor to Trump's top White House advisors will ever be heard by a jury. McAfee's order came alongside a 22-page exhibit from Pete Skandalakis, the executive director of the Nonpartisan Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, who spent the last several weeks poring through Willis's evidence. Skandalakis recently took over the case after the courts removed Willis. Skandalakis concluded that the strongest and most prosecutable case against those seeking to overturn the 2020 presidential election results and prevent the certification of those votes was the one investigated and indicted by former Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith. Well, be that as it may, Mr. Skandalakis, that case no longer exists. That case is no longer a vehicle to hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes. But the Georgia State RICO prosecution still exists. The article continues. Quote, "The criminal conduct alleged in the Atlanta Judicial Circuit's prosecution was conceived in Washington, D.C., not the state of Georgia," he said. "The federal government is the appropriate venue for this prosecution, not the state of Georgia." Jack Smith withdrew his election interference case against Trump in fall 2024, shortly after the Republican won a second term. And friends, here's some of Skandalakis' reasons for not pursuing the Georgia State RICO prosecution. Skandalakis said there is no realistic prospect that a sitting president could be compelled to stand trial in Georgia while he's still in office, and even after that, it could take years to litigate the complex presidential immunity issues and constitutional fights raised in the indictment. So in other words, it would take a long time. It would take quite a while to fight for accountability for what Trump did. He has more reasons. The veteran prosecutor, Skandalakis, also said it would be illogical, unduly burdensome, and costly to try the remaining 14 defendants in the case without Trump, given that he's the central figure named in the indictment. It would be unduly burdensome and costly to try to hold the other indicted co-conspirators accountable for their crimes. What price democracy? What's the value on America's free and fair elections? It would take too long to try to hold Donald Trump accountable. It would cost too much to try to hold his indicted co-conspirators accountable for trying to essentially steal an election from the voters of Georgia? You know, nobody said prosecuting was easy or fun or inexpensive. You know, friends, I handled RICO cases that spanned more than 10 years from the time the investigation was initiated until the time the last defendant who had been convicted at a series of 3 RICO trials, that's how many it took, until the last convicted defendant had been sentenced. Well over a decade. That wasn't easy. Certainly wasn't always fun. Oh, it was challenging, and it took a long time. I can't even imagine how much it cost the American taxpayers. But it was the right thing to do, and the result was never guaranteed. But to say a case like this, where Donald Trump is on an audio recording saying, just find me 11,780 votes, is too costly, too burdensome, or would take too long, is a perversion of justice. And justice matters. Tomorrow's another day, friends. Happy Thanksgiving. Please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you again tomorrow.